If you ever hear sirens wailing in the middle of the night, if the horizon suddenly glows crimson red, if you see firefighters walk into a blaze, never to come back, then you might be in Pripyat, Ukraine, in the early hours of April 26, 1986, where reactor number 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant exploded, opening one of the darkest chapters in modern history. This wasn't a typical accident. There was no deafening blast like Hiroshima, no giant mushroom cloud tearing through the sky like an atomic bomb. But in a silent, invisible way, a new kind of death, ionizing radiation, began to spread. It killed thousands, forced hundreds of thousands to flee, and turned more than 30,000 square kilometers into a zone of eternal exclusion. This story is not just about an explosion. It's about people, about the naive courage of firefighters who ran toward the blaze with no idea what they were breathing in, about the terrifying silence of the Soviet government who valued national pride more than human lives, and about the citizens of Pripyat who sent their kids to school and bought bread that morning, unaware the very air they breathed was poisoned, and about the scientists, engineers, and journalists who dared to speak the truth, in a world where truth was a forbidden word. So what is Chernobyl? A failed safety test that became the worst nuclear disaster in human history. A crack in the myth of Soviet technological supremacy. Proof that a single human error could bring down an entire civilization. This video will guide you through 5 parts. Part 1. Introduction. Back to the moment of no return. Bone-chilling details and stories you've never heard. Part 2. Before the explosion. Inside reactor number 4. The deadly RBMK design and the system that fostered disaster. Part 3. The fatal night. Minute-by-minute breakdown of what happened on April 26, 1986. Part 4. Aftermath. Evacuations, the silent heroes, the lies, and the price of hiding the truth. Part 5. Chernobyl's legacy. A future poisoned by the past, the nuclear debate, and the haunting question, could it happen again? Part 2. Before the explosion. Mankind's finest machine, or a ticking time bomb. The Chernobyl disaster didn't happen overnight. It was conceived decades earlier, through design flaws, cultural denial, and the silent fear of a crumbling empire. 1. Chernobyl nuclear power plant, pride of the Soviet Union. Located about 130 kilometers north of Kyiv, near the Belarus border, the Chernobyl nuclear power plant was among the USSR's most advanced technological achievements by the late 1970s. The complex housed 4 RBMK-1000 nuclear reactors built between 1970 and 1983. RBMK stands for Reactor Bolshoi Mosnichi Kanalny, which means high-power channel-type reactor, a design unique to the Soviet Union. It used graphite as a neutron moderator, light water for cooling, on-load refueling, meaning fuel could be replaced while the reactor was running. On paper, the system was efficient, scalable, and perfect for mass energy production in a growing industrial superpower. But in reality, the RBMK design concealed fatal flaws. 2. The RBMK reactor was a legalized monster. The RBMK reactor lacked a containment structure, unlike most Western reactors. That meant, in case of a steam leak or explosion, radioactive material would be released directly into the environment. If an accident occurred, nothing would contain the fallout. Worse, the RBMK had a dangerous positive void coefficient. When power dropped too low, the reactor became unstable. The control rods used to shut down the reactor had graphite tips, which caused a brief spike in reactivity before reducing it. In simple terms, the RBMK reactor was a double-edged sword. Operated correctly, it worked. But a single mistake could trigger catastrophe, a truth the Soviet system refused to acknowledge. 3. Pripyat, the model Soviet city. Just a few kilometers from the plant stood Pripyat, a city of 49,000 residents, mostly workers, engineers, doctors, and their families. Built alongside the power plant in 1970, Pripyat was a shining example of Soviet modernity. Schools, hospitals, movie theaters, stadiums, even an amusement park, set to open in May 1986. Higher living standards than most Soviet towns. Children were taught that their parents were powering the heart of the motherland. None of them realized they were living next to a nuclear monster. 4. Political pressure and the culture of silence. During the Cold War, technical failures were considered national threats. In the USSR, an unspoken rule existed. It's better to report a fake success than admit a real problem. Engineers feared job loss if they spoke up. Media couldn't report negative news. Bureaucracy was bloated. No one wanted to take responsibility. The Soviet culture of secrecy, fear, and blind obedience created an environment where small errors could become national disasters. 5. The fatal safety test. On April 25, 1986, the plant's management decided to conduct a safety test on reactor number 4. In case of a power outage, how long can the turbine keep spinning and supply power to the cooling system? Sounds simple, but the test was conducted by the least experienced night shift, without the chief safety engineer present, while dangerously low power levels were already triggering alarms. They went ahead because superiors said so. They trusted the system would self-correct. They didn't realize they were arming the time bomb called Chernobyl. By early morning on April 26, 1986, history was about to change forever. Part 3. The Fatal Night. One click, one spark. The whole world held its breath. Saturday, April 26, 1986. Time from 12 a.m. to 1:24 a.m. The shift that changed history. That night, Anatoly Datlov, the deputy chief engineer, supervised the test on reactor number 4. Known for his harshness and arrogance, he routinely dismissed safety warnings. By midnight, the operators had reduced reactor power to a dangerously low level, disabled the automatic shutdown systems, violated multiple safety protocols. Some young engineers raised concerns. The power levels are unstable. We should stop. But Datlov snapped back. Proceed. I'll take responsibility. The test goes out of control. The goal was to cut external power and see how long the turbine could spin and generate electricity to keep the reactor cool. But when the test started, steam pressure dropped, the temperature rose, and the reactor's power output fluctuated erratically. An operator pressed the emergency button, scram, which drove control rods into the reactor to shut it down. That's when the unthinkable happened. 1:23:40 a.m., the first explosion. As the control rods descended, their graphite tips briefly increased reactivity instead of decreasing it. 1:23:40 a.m., a massive steam explosion blew open the reactor. The building shook, flames shot skyward. 1:23:45 a.m., a second explosion, possibly chemical or thermal, blew off the 1,200-ton reactor lid. A pillar of red-orange fire pierced the night. Glowing fragments of radioactive fuel rained down on the plant. Burning graphite lit up the roof like a ghostly bonfire. Reactor number 4 was gone. Pripyat sleeps through the nightmare. Inside the plant, chaos reigned, but in the city of Pripyat, just a few kilometers away, people slept. No sirens, no warnings, no evacuations. Children dreamed of playing in the new amusement park. Parents looked forward to a quiet Saturday. No one knew they were breathing in a radioactive cloud. First responders, into the inferno. Firefighters from Pripyat rushed to the plant within minutes. They wore no radiation suits. No one told them this was a nuclear explosion. They fought fire with water, against burning graphite and nuclear fuel. One firefighter recalled, "I picked up a chunk of graphite. It was glowing. My fingers started to melt." Within hours, they were vomiting, their skin blistering, their organs failing. But they kept fighting. The Soviet silence. It took 3 hours for authorities to even acknowledge an accident. It took 36 hours to evacuate Pripyat. It took other countries, like Sweden, to detect radioactive fallout and forced the USSR to admit something had gone wrong. Morning light over ruin. By sunrise on April 26th, the sky over Pripyat looked calm, but on the ground, people were being torn apart, not by flames, but by radiation. Chernobyl had exploded. Nothing could be undone. History had been rewritten in cesium, iodine, and death. Part 4. Aftermath. Silence doesn't kill instantly, but it kills more than any fire ever could. 1. Pripyat, a city erased. 36 hours after the explosion, at noon on April 27, 1986, the Soviet government finally ordered the evacuation of Pripyat. By then, radiation levels had exceeded safe limits by thousands of times. A calm voice echoed over loudspeakers. "Dear citizens, this is only a temporary precaution. Please bring your documents, a little food, and clothing. You'll be back in a few days." No one ever returned. The city of the future was abandoned forever. 2. The Silent War, the liquidators. In the days and months that followed, over 600,000 people, soldiers, construction workers, engineers, and civilians, were mobilized to clean up and contain the disaster. They became known as the liquidators. Their tasks included extinguishing underground nuclear fires, burying radioactive animals, trees, soil, and debris, building a massive sarcophagus of concrete and steel to seal off the destroyed reactor. Some worked for just 90 seconds on the reactor roof, but absorbed a dose of radiation equivalent to 20,000 X-rays. Many died within weeks. Thousands more lived with cancer, organ failure, and genetic damage for the rest of their lives. 3. Unsung heroes. In this radioactive hell, a few stepped up to do what no one else dared. 3 engineers dove into the blooded basement, opening crucial valves to prevent a second explosion that could have contaminated half of Europe. Doctors treated radiation victims with bare hands, unaware of the invisible poison melting their patients from the inside. Truck drivers hauled radioactive waste, each trip a potential death sentence. None of them were praised in the media. None received medals. Only pain, quiet, slow, and irreversible. 4. A wall of lies. The Soviet regime reported only 2 deaths at the plant, told the world that the situation is under control, filmed propaganda, children playing, smiling citizens, workers eating near the plant. But secret reports told a different story. 134 people suffered acute radiation syndrome within days. Between 1986 and 2000, at least 60,000 deaths, hundreds of thousands more affected. Rates of cancer and birth defects soared in Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia. The world was poisoned, not just by radiation, but by denial. 5. Ghost villages and nameless graves. The 30-kilometer exclusion zone became a permanent no-man's land.
Hundreds of villages were bulldozed and buried. Tens of thousands were buried in sealed graves. No names, no visitors. In the wind that now howls through cracked windows and rusted amusement parks, only stray dogs and radioactive silence remain.
Memory doesn't disappear. It mutates, like radiation, quietly living in every generation. The numbers that speak for themselves. Over 600,000 liquidators deployed. More than 350,000 people forcibly displaced. Between 4,000 and 90,000 deaths, depending on the source. 260,000 kilometers squared of contaminated land. More than 2 million people affected by long-term health consequences, especially thyroid cancer, leukemia, immune system failure, and birth defects. But these numbers are only the visible tip of the disaster, because pain has no official statistic, and the true toll of Chernobyl still unfolds silently decades later. Children born of fallout. In the 1990s, tens of thousands of children in Belarus and Ukraine were born without eyes, limbs, or skull bones, developed gigantic tumors, malformed spines, missing organs, suffered from cognitive and emotional impairments. One child, now a teenager, once asked, "Why don't I look like the others?" No one dared answer, "Because your parents lived in Pripyat." A shift in global thinking. Chernobyl forever altered how the world viewed nuclear energy. Germany, Italy, and Austria began phasing it out. The U.S. tightened reactor safety regulations. Japan, once heavily reliant on nuclear power, would later face its own Chernobyl, Fukushima, in 2011. The International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, described Chernobyl as, quote, "the harshest lesson humanity has ever had to learn," unquote. It exposed not just technical flaws, but systemic arrogance, lack of transparency, and the horrifying cost of silence. Truth finally uncovered. In 2019, HBO released the miniseries Chernobyl, reviving global interest in the disaster. The show didn't just dramatize events. It posed a haunting question: what is the cost of lies? One unforgettable line: "Every lie we tell incurs a debt to the truth. Sooner or later, that debt is paid." Chernobyl wasn't merely a nuclear failure. It was a catastrophe born of dishonesty. And the final lesson: don't forget. Today, the Chernobyl exclusion zone has become a kind of surreal tourist site. Visitors photograph the rusted Ferris wheel, empty classrooms, wolves and deer thriving in radioactive forests. But in the wind that whispers through the dead city, some old survivors still say, "I still hear the sirens in my dreams." Chernobyl is not just the past. It's a warning that humanity can destroy itself if we forget what we once survived.